So as you'll know, in Denmark, for example, it's proposed to reopen schools and childcare.
Already have that are due to expire at midnight on Sunday. Will they be extended for the 3-week period? And perhaps this is for the Chief Medical Officer. Can you maybe tell us when we might have a testing regime that will have that 48-hour turnaround, that will be able to give us back test results and will clear any backlog that exists? And can you confirm if there is a backlog at the moment? Because there's quite a lot of confusion about that at the moment and how many people are awaiting tests. Minister McHugh, can you tell us what level of engagement you've had with the Teachers Union on this? We've had some indications that the agreement that was reached with SNAs is getting a lot of pushback from the unions. So to what extent have you engaged with the unions on this plan? Will schools be open over the summer, for example? Will they reopen towards the end of May and be open through June and early July? And Taoiseach, can you give us an update in relation to government formation? Have you met with Micheál Martin? Is there a framework document? Is it agreed? Will it be published? Thank you.
Okay. I might take that and then go to the Chief Medical Officer, Minister McHugh, Minister Harris. The two negotiating teams for Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are meeting as we speak. All things going to plan. Those negotiating teams will agree a framework document today, and that will be referred to me as President of Fine Gael and also to the President of Fianna Fáil. And the idea then is that we would meet sometime next week. And if we can agree those documents, to then share them with our parliamentary parties. And if that's satisfactory, we'd then be in a position to reach out to Labour, the Greens, Social Democrats, to see if one or more of those parties would agree to be a third pillar in a new government. And both parties are very much of the view that what the country needs for the next 4 to 5 years is a majority government, a stable government, one that can bring the country through this crisis, get our economy and our society going again and look to the future. So we will need that third pillar. We will be encouraging one or more of those parties to join us. If that happens, we'll then be able to negotiate a programme for government, and that programme for government would have to be ratified by the members of each of the three parties. So there's a bit of a way to go yet, but a key milestone that I think we may achieve today is the two negotiating teams between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael agreeing a paper which can then be referred to the two party leaders, and we'll take it from there. So, Tony?
Yes, so just in relation to testing, we need to considerably grow our testing capacity from what it is at the moment. It's not just testing. It's sampling, the taking of the sample, it's the tests, the processing in the laboratory, it's the contact tracing that follows from that. It's then dealing with each of the individual contacts who may need to be sampled and tested themselves in a new arrangement as part of our, if you like, a part of our management in a situation where we might be contemplating lifting restrictions, and that's what we have to plan for. It's a considerably greater number of tests than we currently are doing, and the HSE and Paul Reid has strengthened his team around the planning of this in recent days to try to give us, as quickly as we can possibly get it, the capacity that we think we need to not only deal with what's coming through right now, because we think we're at or about at the point where we think we can deal in real time with the number of cases that are currently presenting with our current case definition. We'll be looking to try and broaden and make that case definition more sensitive for a situation that would be appropriate if we were thinking about lifting restrictions. And that would mean that we would need to be greatly increasing the number of people tested, not for the purpose of testing but for alone, but for the purpose of ensuring that we had a result back within either same day or following day, that we could then contact trace within same day or following day. So that real-time turnaround, that's what we're really going to need. Because if we manage to suppress this infection in the way that we are optimistic that we will, but we haven't evidence that we have as yet, we have to absolutely be sure that we have the greatest chance of picking up and detecting in real time any new cases and moving and responding. Because as we change some of the measures that are in place, we really need to know that as quickly as possible, if there is an effect in terms of the increase in the number of cases resulting from any of those relaxations, that we can pick that up and respond to that as quickly as possible.
When are we going to get there? What's the backlog?
So as quickly as possible. And we're going to need to do that work certainly within the period of time that we now have between now and the end of this month to allow ourselves to be assured that, first of all, the character, and I've said this on many occasions, the characteristics of the disease are such that they are where we want them to be. Ideally, the reproductive number that the Minister has mentioned of 1 is well below 1, that the number of cases coming into ICU is much lower than we've seen, and that's dropped in an encouraging way as we've seen in the course of the last week. We're going to need to see that in place, those disease characteristics in place, and then also those arrangements in terms of the public health management, a really responsive, high capacity system for sampling, for testing, for contact tracing and for real-time reporting. And we need all of those requirements to enable us to contemplate a change in the measures that are in place at this moment in time. So in terms of backlog, I know that the HSE has an arrangement in place through Germany. I've given figures every evening this week in terms of the numbers of cases that have come back through that, and I think the HSE is confident that it will have worked its way through that within a matter of days.
Two issues you raised in relation to school closures. Schools are closed now until further notice, and at all times will be guided by the public health experts. I've always said that we will need Leaving Cert certificate students in their classrooms for a minimum of 2 weeks. I haven't changed my position on that, and that is important to point out. But in relation to your second question around consultation with unions, there's been extensive consultation. There's been tremendous goodwill at all times coming from the unions and the management bodies as well. And I can say as well that the collective response from them is that they're united in dealing with this problem, whatever it takes to get the Leaving Cert through, whether it's end of July or beginning of August. They will be there to do that. And in relation to where we'll be over the next course of time, we'll be continually monitoring the situation, getting feedback from the public health officials, but most importantly is the consultation. And even during the last few weeks, and last week, for example, I had a web conference with all the spokespersons from the different parties and independents, getting their opinion and their perspective. So we'll continue to keep those lines of communication open.
Yeah, it is my intention to extend the regulations to cover the period of the NEFID recommendations. It was always the intention that the regulations would run alongside the recommendations and restrictions of NEFID, so I intend to extend the regulations for the period of these restrictions.
Taoiseach, did you consider any further restrictions this time around? And given that we've seen in the last few days some people flouting them after only 2 weeks, how do you propose to keep people sticking to them over weeks 3, 4, 5, however long it is? And Minister McHugh, when it comes to admissions now to college, obviously that process is going to be delayed. Have you any idea how long it's going to be before some of those people who do their Leaving Cert in July or August can actually get in and start their first year of college?
Just in terms of the restrictions, as has been the case from the very start, we're very much guided by the advice of the National Public Health Emergency Team, so I might ask the CMO to comment on that. In terms of enforcement, the laws that were enacted the other day by Minister Harris, they will be extended until the 5th of May, and we'll need to have a ongoing guard operation to ensure that people comply. But as I've always said from the start, it's not our desire to turn Ireland into a police state, even for one day, never mind for a month. And I don't want to see those powers used anything other than sparingly as a last resort. And the vast majority of people have complied, are cooperating, and that needs to continue, and I believe it will continue. And I want to thank the Irish people for their cooperation and their forbearance to date. But the Gardaí do now have very extensive powers that can be used if they have to be used. But let's not use them. Let's all do the right thing.
Yeah, Sean, in relation to that transition now from post-primary to third level, we've had a lot of engagement with representatives from the third level sector. They've been very positive, and they have adopted the position of flexibility, that they'll work with the new timeline, and that's really, really important. And whatever decision is taken, I believe it'll be a positive one. And just to widen it out a bit, a lot of our post-primary school students go to Northern Ireland, they go to Britain. We're working and engaging with the authorities in Great Britain as well, because I know timelines, because they're changing now, that there'll be a different timeline for entry into third level in Britain. So our officials have engaged. I've formally written to the Department of Education in London, and also I've been engaging with the Minister for Education, Gavin Williamson, who I spoke to this morning, that he's willing to work with us and he wants to find a solution to this as well. Well, that will be a decision for following the engagement, and obviously today we're announcing the new date. So I'm confident whatever date that'll be will meet the requirements, and whatever date that is, I'm not in a position to give you that today.
Okay, next question.
Yeah. So we met as a National Public Health Emergency team again this morning, and one of the questions we always ask is, are there additional measures that we need to take? And we gave consideration to that, and our recommendation was to just stick with the current set of measures, but for an extended period of time. What we've seen over the course of the last number of weeks, and as we've been reporting to, is a substantial drop in the so-called reproduction number in the population. It's gone from maybe a peak in this country at around 4, we think, in the early days around St. Patrick's Day, and it's continued to drop, and it's now hovering around 1. We need to be sure that we get it below 1, and we're not certain at this point in time whether we're a little bit above 1 or a little bit below 1, and we need to continue to monitor for another period of time. We're confident that we have the right set of measures in place to achieve that. It's been achieving a continuing drop. Obviously, we see that stall in a way that gives us concern. We might have to give further consideration to that, but we think that's the right set of measures for now, and we haven't advised government to take any additional measures at this moment in time.
Taoiseach Varadkar, Cambridge from the Journal.ie. I'm wondering if you could give us an update on your conversations with your counterparts in the UK. Are there fears that we will have to remain restricted for longer if their crisis continues as it's ongoing now? And as something of a follow-up to that, the PSNI in the North have launched a dedicated webpage for people to report instances where social distancing isn't being adhered to. Would you consider introducing something like that here?
Well, first of all, my counterpart in the UK is in hospital, as you know. So, other than sending him a text message to wish him the best a few days ago, we haven't been in direct contact since the middle of March. But there is, of course, ongoing contact between the Irish government and the British government. So, Mr. Donoghue was in touch with the Chancellor of the Exchequer only the other day, with his counterpart and Secretary for Northern Ireland. So really it's a case of just information sharing and communications and giving each other the heads up on things, because the situations you can see in Britain is very different and very much more severe than what we're facing here in Ireland. And what we want to do in Ireland is avoid the scenes and the awful experience that people are having in Spain and Italy and the UK and France, and it's our objective to achieve that, and I believe we can. Obviously law enforcement is a matter for the Gardaí rather than for me as Taoiseach, but I wouldn't like to get into that space. I have seen on social media, particularly in the UK, people reporting people for having gone for a second run or for being 2.1 kilometre from their house or that type of thing. I don't really think we should be in that space. The laws are there for the Gardaí to use sparingly, where people are egregiously flouting the rules or where they're not cooperating with the Garda who tells them to go home. But I don't think that we will suppress this virus by becoming the valley of the squinting window. I think we'll suppress this virus by doing the right thing by each other and doing the right thing by our neighbours, and by following the advice that we've received from our expert doctors and our expert team, and bearing in mind in doing so we're helping to save the life perhaps of somebody we know, an elderly person or a person with an underlying condition, and we're also making life that little bit easier for those who are on the front line trying to treat this virus.
Higgins from the Sun.
Minister McHugh, am I right to say that for non-leaving cert students, the school year they won't be going back to school until next school year?
No, that's not correct. At the moment, the schools are closed, and that will be the situation until further notice. So we'll be guided by the advice and the expert advice. So no, we're not ruling that out.
Taoiseach, there will be people who see 3 more weeks of restrictions today and the good weather at the weekend, and they'll think, well, I'll just relax it for this weekend and I'll go see family, and then I won't see them again for 3 weeks. What would you say to those people?
I'd really encourage people not to visit their family over the Easter weekend or over the course of the next 3 weeks. There is, of course, an exception, where somebody has to visit a relative to provide essential care. That is different, but that is an exception and a relatively rare one. And the reason why I'd ask people particularly not to see their friends and relatives over the next few weeks is what we're trying to do here is to confine this virus to households, to make sure that if it's in a household, it stays in that household and we don't see spread from one household to the other. So if somebody from one household meets with somebody from another household, that's how the virus spreads. And that's really why we're asking people to make sure that you don't mix with another household, except for those unusual exceptions and rare exceptions that have been set out, because that is how the virus spreads. And this is the whole point of this, is to making sure it doesn't spread from one household to the other, and that we always observe those really basic things, and we need to come back to them again and again. Keeping a physical distance of 2 metres, washing your hands for 20 seconds regularly, making sure that you observe coughing and sneezing etiquette. Those actions, above all other actions, are going to be the ones that are most successful in containing the virus.
Cuiva from Taoiseach Cara.
Is ceistí seo an Aaron McHugh tá told seo ar fád tugaí agus tána héanaach just más féidir leat é rá rís a scoil le hol. An mu sé gceiste go fáil go rací na daltaí arás ar an scoil Solomé na scrúda ar siúil agus céhhéad idirbhartíochta atá deanta agaí leis na ceart cuman go dtí seo agus go bhís duitse an bhfuil siad ar bord leis an moladh seo.
Okay, dús bara an cinniú atá deanta inniu bimime ag gcóraigh ag brachnú ar na dalta scolanna a gceanú an airteist agus fáinne na dalta scolanna a gceanú an airteist bé an cinniú fuidir an scrúdaí atá Sacria fáinne mí mehebh de sin bógamid an data sin go dtí Jeremy Uil nó go dtí an ar dús mí lúnasa agus de sin tá nachrú sin inta tábhachta mar bhí na teachtarí de taag bonse maithú na tiismarí agus na tealaí le agus na dalta scolanna le bhí siad fin brú leis an mícintethe leis an dat agus bhí siad fin stros agus brú fuidir an mícintethe agus sin an fá gur dachraí mé an cinniú sin agus maidir leis an teastas sóisiire tá béna Chester Social ag bógaráis na rangana ar dús go luí ar dús I mí man fór nar a bheith nar a tucaí na scolanna arás ag an am sin agus bhí sin difriúil bhí sin scrúdaithe agrithe leis na muntrí agus na scolanna hana féin agus comáiclí sin na rudaí atá ag bógó agus an leanúnachas go dtí an tríú level bimime ag gcónaí ina